The 2024 election will absolutely have an effect on your stocks. Depending on who wins this next election could alter the next 4 years. Will we go to war in Ukraine, Middle East, or with China? We've already seen a Trump assassination attempt, Biden dropping out, and Kamala Harris taking his place. So let's start by looking at history to see how past presidential changes affected the market. Now, going back to 1950, this is how presidents have done depending on who controls Congress. So if you had a Democratic president with Democratic control of Congress, 8.72% return. Okay, look at this. Republican president with Republican Congress, 11.7% return. Democrat president with Republican Congress, 14.5%. Look at this one. Republican president with a Democrat Congress, 1% return. So there's a big difference when the discrepancy between Congress and president occurs for Republican. I mean, look at this difference right here. Massive difference here. Now, overall, the best returns are a Democratic president with divided Congress versus a Republican president with divided Congress. So basically, it's saying that a balance of power is best based on history. But remember, this is correlation, potentially, but is it causation? I don't know. Honestly, is the sample size big enough? I mean, how many presidents have we had since 1950? Not as many as you would imagine. So since 1950, we've had 14 different presidents. Now, here is their performance. But a thing I want you guys to remember here, and I've showed this chart before in a different way. We had this made for us. Look at all the bad things that have happened since 1950. All of these awful things have happened. And guess what? Stocks go up. Why? Because America keeps growing. That's why the stock market to GDP ratio is so important. But you look at each president, very few have had negative returns during their hold. One of which, though, was George W. Bush, who I'm a big fan of, but he took over right during the peak of the dot-com bubble and ended during the absolute lowest point of the great financial crisis. I mean, talk about, I think it was a bad rap for him. My bias is probably showing up here, but look at all these terrible things that have happened. And the market just keeps going up over long periods of time. As Warren Buffett says, he would never bet against America. So how does every president's policies affect the market? Well, first, let's break down. For those of you who aren't from the US and want to have an understanding, Republicans are supposed to be the party of smaller government. Democrats are the party of larger government. So I guess the first thing you have to ask yourself is, do you believe the government is here to help people in an effective way? If you do believe so and you want higher government, you believe in higher taxes. And let me ask this question. Do you believe that higher taxes incentivize the proper people to grow and get more money? I would doubt that. JFK, even though he was a Democrat, believed in lower taxes, especially for the wealthy. Why? Because he believed the wealthy are the ones that start the businesses and hire more people. And if you give them an incentive to do this by lowering taxes, they're going to do more. When he took over in office, the highest tax bracket was 92%. This is not made up. That means for every extra dollar you made above the highest tax bracket, you only got to keep 8 cents. Let me ask you a question. I don't care how wealthy you are. Is that incentive for you to go work? Now, over the last few decades, my personal opinion is Republicans and Democrats haven't been much different. The reason being is they both have the same incentives. These people are in office to make decisions that keep them in office. And when you have big companies out there spending millions of dollars lobbying, and go look at all these candidates, they have both, companies donate to both sides of the aisle because they know both sides of the aisle can legally be bought with lobbying. So what happens here though? I do think the president's number one ability to change economic policy is through tax cuts. But the hard part is those tax cuts are only as good as the budgets behind them. I love Ronald Reagan, but he started us back in 1980 on our debt path. The debt this country has accumulated over the last 40 some years has been insane. That's our biggest worry about the future. Right now, we're spending over $1 trillion per year just on interest charges. It has skyrocketed. Why? Because just 2 or 3 years ago, what were interest charges for the government? 90-day Treasury was paying 0%. They could borrow in 90 days for 0%. They could borrow on 10 years for 2%. Now it's 4.5%. So when they start to put more money in these loans start to come due, they're going to pay a lot more money. 90-day Treasury now pays over 5%. So before they were paying 0, now they're paying 5%. As much as I'd love to give the president a lot of credit for things, I look at the saying, if you're not balancing the budget, all you're doing is you're kicking the can down the road. You're sitting here saying, listen, I always joked with people, George W. Bush gave nice tax cuts, but he increased spending. What does that do? All it does is kick the can down the road for the next president to increase taxes. That's all it does. Whenever you borrow money, you're borrowing from the future. And even if you cut taxes for people today, if you don't have a balanced budget to have that coincide with the tax cuts, you're just waiting for a problem down the road. The last time we had a balanced budget and a surplus was in the late 90s with Clinton. What was the reason there? Well, it was a combination of higher taxes from the Bush senior years, as well as a surging economy. We had the dot-com surge. We had 8.3% GDP growth in one of those years. When you have a massive GDP growth that you weren't expecting, you're going to have more tax revenue. And when you have more tax revenue, it's easier to have that balanced budget or a surplus. That was 2 years of a surplus. In the last 43 years, we've had 2 years of a surplus. Guys, I don't care who becomes president. At the end of the day, you have to properly incentivize people. As Charlie Munger always says, show me an incentive, I'll show you the result. When it comes to President Trump and Vice President Harris and their policies, how much different are they? You might sit there and say very different because their words are very different. But what about their actions? Guys, in the first Trump presidency, 2016 to 2020, my brother and I were talking about it. There's evidence. Now, granted, our income went up, so it's hard to see exactly, but there's evidence that if our income stayed the same, our taxes would have gone up. So a Republican president who's supposed to be about lower taxes and supposed to be about smaller government, and my taxes went up. Even when you see big tax cuts or big tax increases, they're usually met on the other side with other hidden behind the envelope kind of things. A few years ago, when Governor Kasich was running for president, I was fortunate enough to be invited to a small dinner with 7 or 8 people, and he was the governor of Ohio. And in that meeting, I said to him, hey, listen, Ohio is losing people to Florida because of no taxes. It's Texas because no taxes. What are you doing? He said, listen, our plan is to get Ohio to 0 income tax, but I've got to meet that with an increase in taxes elsewhere. And I looked at him and said, but you're a Republican. You're supposed to believe in lower taxes. To which he said, well, I can't get rid of the tax revenue. And I'm like, this is how I knew immediately right then and there. They don't care about lower taxes. I don't care what party you're on. You might sit there and say, I care about lower taxes, but all they're going to do is decrease the taxes here and increase the taxes here. They want the offset of revenue. They don't think that a decrease in taxes should be led with a decrease in spending. There was no mention of, let's just cut back spending. None of it, all about it. All it was, no, I can't just decrease, I got to increase taxes here. But the same thing happened on the left. In order to be elected president, you can't have these far extreme left views and you can't have far extreme right views. That's why I always laugh when I hear people say that George W. Bush was a far right winger and Trump was a far right winger. I'm like, do you have any understanding of what's going on? At the end of the day, there's a balance. And right now we have $34 trillion of debt that's growing at $1 trillion every few months. Guys, I don't care who's president, and I don't care who you are out there. If you don't think that's going to be met with higher taxes at some point down the road, that's absolutely crazy. It's absolutely going to be met with that. So the main question here is, which president would be better for your money? Well, I want to go back here and look at this data. Right here, it shows the end value of the S&P 500 based on these presidential levels. So obviously the previous one would be the start value. So let's start with Johnson here. When Johnson left the presidency, the S&P was at 102. When Nixon left, it was at 81. So in that Nixon presidency, stocks went down 20%. As you know, I have my stock market to GDP ratio. Let's go look in 1968 what the stock market to GDP ratio was. We're scrolling all the way back here. 1968. The stock market, according to this, was overvalued by about 12%. And the next 10-year returns were negative. So it was overvalued, but we're slightly basically even for the next 10 years. Now, the biggest thing I want to show you guys is the bottom of the bear market in 1982. This is when Reagan came in, and look at Reagan's returns right here. Reagan took over at 134, ended at 286. Over doubling of the S&P in that time, not including dividends, which were 4 or 5% a year. But guess what, guys? Look at Reagan. When he took over, the market was at 50, 60% undervalued. That, to me, is what drives the market, not the president in power. It's valuations. When you run the correlation on these, it's over a 0.85 correlation to the market returns is based on valuation. Because I speak time and time again, the more you pay for something, the less your return is going to be. The less you pay for something, the more your return is going to be. Now, guys, if what you're looking for is great returns, you got to come join the community. And you've probably noticed that we have limited the number of daily spots for the Everything Money community and software. The reason for that is because the software as it exists today includes everything we have to offer for stocks, retirement, and real estate. These are all the tools we have right now for all of these. Now, behind the scenes, we're making changes. So in the near future, this current offer, including everything here, is absolutely going away. As we've been getting feedback from our community members, people have expressed that they want us to focus on very specific aspects of the Everything Money software and tools that apply to them at that moment in time. They don't want to have too many options when they're using the software. They don't want the cheesecake factory of software, and we don't want to be that. So if you've been watching our channel for a while, you'll remember that this software was originally built as an Excel sheet, selfishly for myself, so that my team and I could use it to constantly make better decisions for stocks, real estate, and retirement. But the channel has grown over 100 times, and our community has grown even higher than that. So it's becoming less about me and more about how I can better serve you and the community members. Now, the good news is these changes haven't been made yet. So if you join today at the link in the description below, you'll be grandfathered in for life with all of these tools. And every tool we make in the future will be given to you automatically. This is the best deal that we've offered to date. And I'm telling you this now because there's still time for you to sign up as long as you join the community today before we make the changes. You'll be able to keep all of these tools no matter what happens. So click on the link in the description below. It'll be the best decision you've made all year. Now, what's going to happen in the election? I have no idea. Right now, as of this very writing, Kamala Harris is showing a slight edge over Trump. At the end of the day, what I want you to do is be the kind of person who is not going to be affected by the election. Your outcome in your future should have no bearing based on the election. That's the reason you're on this YouTube channel, to learn. You're here to learn. You're not one of those lemmings out there who lets somebody else determine your future and your success. That's the big key here for this channel. This channel is about teaching financial literacy and investing, but it's also about teaching a mindset. And the mindset I want you to have is you're the biggest determining factor in your future. And unfortunately, I personally believe that if you rely on the president or somebody else in power to determine your success and anything superficial besides you, you're playing a victim in some fashion. Is it extreme? Maybe. The bottom line is, I think whoever wins the presidency in the next 4 or 10 years is probably going to have a hard time getting good returns in the market because no factor having to do with them. It's just valuations and where they are. We are at historically high valuations, numbers we haven't seen since 1928. And you saw what happened in 1928 for the next 10 years. Are we going to have a bad market this year? I have no idea. But I do know that the next 5 or 10 years are not going to be as good as the last 5 or 10 years. It's going to be very difficult for that to happen. Could it be different this time? Absolutely. But the main focus I want you to have is finding a process that works for you, buying great companies at good prices, and dollar cost averaging to low cost ETFs. That's the way you're going to make great returns. And that has nothing to do with who's president and who's in Congress. I'm going to spend my time looking for value stocks no matter who's in office and who's running things. So if you want to see the 33 stocks that make sense to me, click our next video. Thank you very much for your time.